All right, hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Bamboo Chalupa Digital Marketing Podcast. My name is Brett Snyder, the owner of Knucklepuck, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Nate Shiver, the author of shiverweb.com.
Howdy, howdy.
So today we are going to move into part 2 of our 3-part series that talks about SEO and social media working together. On our last episode, we talked about social media as an organic ranking factor. And it's something that's a big debate in the SEO community, is largely divided on, but really looking at, do Facebook likes, tweets, plus ones, do all of those actually impact your ability to rank organically for different search phrases? Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about using social media to build relationships with key influencers or marketing prospects in your space that can help you enhance your SEO campaigns, both in terms of understanding the content that you want to be able to promote to that community, but also being able to identify the folks that are going to help you take that content and reach a larger audience than you would have before. And then on our next episode, we're going to kind of extend that conversation and talk about using social media to amplify SEO campaigns, to generate more links, more exposure. And specifically, we're going to talk about paid media. So we're talking about your Facebook ads, your stumble upon paid discovery, and your Reddit, and et cetera, et cetera. And so just to give a brief recap of our last episode, as I mentioned, we talked about whether social media factors influenced SEO rankings. And even though that these social media factors have no proven causal impact on SEO rankings, meaning that more likes do not necessarily mean you will rank higher for a particular keyword, even though there is no causal impact on SEO, there's still a very, very compelling reason why all SEOs really must incorporate social media into their overall digital marketing strategies. And that has to do with the relationships that social media can help you generate. At its core, organic rankings are based on trust and authority. Social media helps curate trust and authority. And your relationships are where these two disciplines intersect. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And we talked about this last episode as well, but this idea of relationships is not a new phenomenon when it comes to digital marketing. Search engines have always used relationship modeling to understand who we are online and where our authority lies. Our online reputation is defined as a product of our relationships. And when we talk about taking an integrated approach to digital marketing, which has been the overall theme of the Bamboo Chalupa podcast, when we talk about this integrated approach to digital marketing, we have to embrace social media as a tool and a tactic to curate these relationships.
Yeah, and so when you're going out doing social, it's important to keep in mind that social isn't something you do. It's not a strategy. It's a channel, just like SEO is a channel and PR is a channel that you use to build on your strategy of generating revenue through earned attention. In contrast to, getting attention by paying for it with PPC ads, banner ads, or what we'll talk about next week, paid social attention. And actually, at the State of Search conference, Marty Weintraub of AimClear actually made a really poignant comment during his presentation that social media is not a strategy. It's a channel where your content plays out. And so that's going to be kind of the running theme of how we're not going to be doing social, that we're going to be using social as a channel and looking at how it overlaps with SEO so that we can kind of build on the relationships that you build in social media.
The other important thing to remember is that social media is more than just Facebook and Twitter. As marketers, we actually have a very bad habit of being able to point to the market leader and almost using them as synonymous with the industry itself. When people think social media, they think Facebook and Twitter. When people think SEO, they think Google. But we're really talking about social media as the overarching discipline that uses social communities to engage with your target audience on their turf and on their terms.
Yeah, what's really interesting to think about, we talk about Facebook and Twitter like they're synonymous with social, but social has been around even before the modern web. If you remember, I was like 7 and 8, but I still remember like the old bulletin boards and chat rooms. And then once the web did come, you had email and you had the old school forums, which are still around. Blog comments are really even, a form of social media. And so it's important to keep in mind that the tools haven't changed. And even though social nowadays is usually Facebook and Twitter, you want to keep in mind that it's the bigger concept of social interaction on the web. And keep in mind that the execution is going to be the same no matter what channel of social you're using.
And that really ties back to, as we talked about, this idea of relationship modeling. The execution of social media strategy is simply building relationships. Like Nate said, that used to be email and forums and blog comments. Now it's tweets and plus ones and, and LinkedIn shares and all things like that. But when we talk about social media, again, let's get away from the individual platform for a second and talk about the key attributes that define what social communities are. Social communities are essentially an opt-in content network. People have chosen, they have made a conscious effort to participate in these communities and participate in the sharing of content within that community. Another item to think about here is that this is really just a collection of people with pre-qualified interests. As a marketer, people used to buy email lists. People still buy email lists because they have these pre-qualified interests where you can say, this list of people is already interested in your product. Social communities are really just the organic way that is manifested on the web. People come in, they opt into this content network because they have pre-qualified interests in whatever that content network happens to be talking about. And Nate touched on this before where, we talk about the idea of converging media. It's really the intersection of your paid, your earned, and your owned media. And paid is pretty self-explanatory. Your earned is your kind of organic traffic, things that just happen because you've done good things. And the owned is the stuff that you actually, and all of these kind of manifest in your social communities. But if we really get down to, the most important thing, if there's one thing that you need to remember about social media, it's that it's social. It really encourages dialogue over monologue. Anyone considering social media as a valuable tool for engaging your target audience has to remember that success or failure in this realm will ultimately be determined by how well you understand and embrace the social aspects of the community to build lasting, sustainable relationships.
Yeah, and so I have a really cool case study of someone who did it well, who didn't just barge into a community and just start talking about themselves. And that's the health and fitness website Greatest. And I'll post a link to the interview where the founder talked about this case study. But basically, Greatest is a health and fitness website, and they were starting up. And part of their strategy was to build earned attention. And they knew that they had a big audience that was hanging out on Reddit. Basically the fitness subreddit. And I've written in some posts about how Redditors they sort of have an anti-marketing stance. And so I think this case study was especially useful where, they wanted to get in front of people who were fitness fanatics, but also fitness beginners. They didn't just go in and start posting, but instead they got in contact with the moderators of the forum. And they basically said, hey, we're starting up this website. What would be something that you guys need? Tell us what would be an asset that you guys would love to have exist. And basically the moderator said, well, we have a huge problem with beginners coming to the fitness subreddit who are overwhelmed with all the threads and all the conversations going on. They don't know where to start. But then members who have been around for a while also would get annoyed with having to answer basically the same beginner questions over and over and over. So the moderator said, we don't have time to put this together, but we would love it if someone could invest in basically a beginner's guide to the fitness subreddit, something that a beginner who wanted to get into the fitness subreddit could show up, see what it's all about, get their initial questions answered, and go from there and get really involved. And so Greatest went off and they invested a ton of time, ton of resources into building out basically a microsite with infographics and videos to intro beginners to the subreddit. And it was something that was very tastefully done. And it was something where the moderators won, the members won, and Greatest won because they got in front of their audience. They got a lot of earned attention. And it was something that was sort of a win-win-win for everyone involved in a way where building a relationship first and building on that social channel first allowed them to get, SEO wins down the road, allowed them to get further social wins down the road.
And Brian Dean from Backlinko recently wrote an awesome post for Pat Flynn's Smart Passive Income, which is another one of my favorite podcasts. And I know one of the reasons, Pat Flynn's one of the reasons why Nate and I actually wanted to start Bamboo Chalupa. But what Brian talked about was this concept of wow content. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's exactly what Nate just talked about. The best content that you're going to be able to produce for SEO or for social media promotion is the content that makes people go, wow. You want to be able to create something that is so strong, that is so valuable and so extraordinary that people can't help but pay attention to it. So we're going to talk about using social media to build relationships with your target audience. And in the context of this series, since it does focus on, SEO and social working together, we're going to talk about our target audience being the key influencers or marketing prospects, the people who will ultimately share that wow content, the people that you want to engage with to amplify or enhance our marketing campaigns. AJ Cohn, who I know Nate and I have referenced before, he owns Blind 5-Year-Old, he wrote a tremendous article about SEO and social media and kind of summed up really in as much of a nutshell as you can possibly sum up the idea of social media as an SEO tool or tactic. He talked about this and he made the claim that it's not the actual social activity that matters, but what happens as a result of that activity. And this is extremely, extremely valuable for an SEO campaign because social media should drive the conversation. But the website, which is where we're trying to build our links and get, our visitors to visit, the website should drive the story. And so I came up with my own tongue-twisting variation of AJ's quote. And I like to tell people that social sows the seeds of solid SEO. Using social media effectively to build and curate relationships can have an overwhelming impact on your ability to create and promote great content that builds links and reinforces your authority and relevance in your space.
All right, so to actually start the relationship, you got to find the people to have the relationship with. And we're going to outline a few sets of tools about finding those people, about finding your audience, whether it be on Facebook or Twitter or where else. And when we talk about these tools, it's important to not get boxed in by the tools that we talk about. But the point of talking about these is to talk about the line of thinking that you'll use with whatever tools you end up using and following the threads so that you can find the little gold mine, the small audience who will actually be fans of your work or they're pre-qualified as Brett said earlier. And to think of these tools that, they're a means to an end. So Brett, you've done a lot of awesome work with Twitter and knowing Twitter tools. So take that away.
Sure. So when we talk about Twitter, there's a couple of big ones that I want to throw out for you. There's a lot of tools that will essentially do what Clout claimed to do, to be able to tell you these are the people who are authorities in your space. And I have looked at a lot of them over the years. And the one that I keep coming back to, especially with Twitter, is wefollow.com. The tagline for wefollow.com is discover prominent people. And I'm not sure exactly what it is. I honestly can't tell you what they do differently in terms of their product versus the others. But I have always felt that with wefollow.com, you can drop in a particular subject or a particular topic, and it will tell you who the key influencers are in that space. And so I've had the most success with wefollow.com than really any of those other tools that claim to curate key influencers. And the reason I really like it is that it's not so overwhelming. They really kind of narrow it down to the super, super key influencers. And so this is important because not only is this going to show you kind of the big ones that may be outside your league, but you can also start to then, again, like Nate said, follow the threads of this, understand who the key influencers are, and then take a look at who they follow. Take a look at who they take the time to check out. When we talk about the idea, we're going to talk about Twitter lists in a second, but we talk about Twitter lists as being a great way to almost create your own little social community that's centered around the people you consider to be authorities in your niche. Another tool that I want to really kind of point out for anybody who's not familiar is Followerwonk. Followerwonk was actually acquired by Moz I think it was about 2 years ago, Nate. Yeah.
Yes.
So I think I think 2 years ago, Moz acquired Followerwonk, which lets you know that they obviously know their stuff. And really, what this does is it helps you get you a sense of who follows the people that you deem to be important. And the best thing that I like about Followerwonk, and we can put some screenshots in our recap here, but what Followerwonk allows you to do is it allows you to compare users. And anytime that you can compare users on things, you can look for where those users overlap. So my pro tip that I would give you guys for using Followerwonk is to find two people in your two profiles, we should say, that are related to you, whether your personal brand or maybe your company account. Find two that you would deem to be essentially on your level. Drop those two in and also yourself. Compare the three of them. Followerwonk then gives you the opportunity to filter down to show you who follows those two competitors but does not follow you. And I found this to be much, much more valuable than simply looking at somebody's and saying, oh, well, they follow these people, but not me. With looking at just one profile, somebody may follow Nate and not me because they went to high school with Nate and not me. That has nothing to do with SEO. It has nothing to do with where we overlap in terms of our interests and our subject matter expertise. But by looking at the people, if you're an SEO, by looking at the people who follow Nate and follow me, but don't follow you, gives you a sense that these folks obviously are interested and tuned into the SEO industry. They're following multiple people that, have at least some degree of authority, but they're not following you. So you can kind of go through and qualify some of these, these users and find your key influencers based on a number of different variables, as opposed to simply they follow one person and don't follow me. I mentioned Twitter lists a couple of minutes ago. When we talk about Twitter lists, this is something where it's almost not even a tool. And anytime I kind of talk about using social media to amplify SEO, I always feel that Twitter lists are almost too beginner. But then I think about the fact that a lot of people still don't use them. People still don't understand the value that they bring. With Twitter lists, you can create almost your own micro feed of people on Twitter that are surrounding whatever, topic that you want to, engage them around. So for me, for example, I have a Twitter list that is publicly available. Anybody listening to this episode can go ahead and download it or subscribe to it rather. And it's called my Steak Sauce SEOs, which is a throwback to a How I Met Your Mother joke where, if you're steak sauce, it means you're A1. And so these are the people that I want to follow. These are the people where these are my tastemakers, where if they say something, I need to be listening. As somebody who wants to continue, who considers myself, and I know Nate feels the same, an ongoing student of SEO, these are the people that are going to help me get better. You can segment out Twitter lists geographically. When you talk about your geography or your local geography, that was the original social network. You originally could only interact with people that you were physically located next to. Find these people. That hasn't really changed all that much. Being able to understand who the key influencers are in your local community gives you the opportunity to potentially engage with them face-to-face, to meet at networking events, to potentially do things like interviews and be able to have a little bit more of a consistent relationship. Now, you can search for Twitter lists, so you don't even have to create all of these yourself. You can search for publicly available Twitter lists and either subscribe or export the followers and be able to say who really is worth, a second look. You can look at competitor Twitter lists, not only the ones that your competitors may have created, but also the list that your competitors are a part of. And I'll have screenshots of all of these in the show notes here. But really what you want to remember when it comes to Twitter lists is the idea that this is a micro feed that is defined by the criteria you deem to be important. These are the people where you can start to follow back, to be able to tweet at them. These are the people that may ask questions. You think about one of the most valuable Twitter lists that I have is my journalists list. These are the journalists that are going to be asking questions about things my clients are involved in, because journalists love Twitter. They love social media. This is where they ask questions. If you're paying attention, you're able to provide a journalist with subject matter expertise that they need, and then you're going to get a link back to your website because you've provided them with that expertise. So there's a lot of tools here. I kind of just focused largely on Twitter, but I also know Nate has had a lot of success using Facebook and using one of, again, like Twitter lists being one of the most underutilized aspects of Twitter. Nate has had a lot of success working with Facebook and one of their most underutilized tools, and that is their graph search.
Yes, and 2 years ago, I remember all the press around graph search. People were actually saying that it was going to be a Google killer. And I really think in the past year, people have forgotten about it. Even though, according to a study by Facebook, users average 3.74 degrees of separation. And so, this is the idea, the whole 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon idea. And so based on this, on Facebook, you are theoretically able to connect with anyone on Facebook in less than 4 emails. And, this study was done in 2011. And in 2011, there were 845 million total Facebook users. As of June 2014, there are now 829 daily active users and 1.32 billion monthly active users. So the idea that you could get in touch with any of these people just by slicing and dicing and figuring out who's connected to who is really, really cool. And so Facebook Graph Search, if you never played around with it, it's an amazing way to discover second and third tier connections that already exist. And then also find overlapping interests with those second and third tier connections. So let's suppose that I move to a new city. I'm going to move out to Dallas, and I want to get in touch with people in the marketing industry there. Well, I can do a graph search for people who live in Dallas and work in marketing, and I have a list. Well, that's going to be a lot of people. Dallas is a big city. I can slice that down even further by saying who attended the University of Georgia. Well, now I have some of my own kind, some Georgia Bulldogs, who are marketing people in Dallas. And it might be creepy if I did direct outreach to them, but if I overlaid their journal, if I overlaid their interests or maybe where they worked, it might not be so creepy, and it might stumble upon a shared interest where, we might be going to the same industry events, and I would know, someone who I could get in touch with. If you are doing client work or you're doing PR work for your own website, it would be really helpful to know who exactly the local journalists are. You could certainly find them on Twitter, but often you can use Facebook Graph Search to not only find them, but also find out what their interests are. And find out, pages that they like, their demo, and you can really, it's just expanding Facebook Graph Search into, whatever direction you want to go in. And it's something that it's sort of only limited by your imagination and how you want to slice and dice how people are connected. And I would recommend playing around with it.
One of the other great ways to use graph search that I have had a lot of success with, where once you slice and dice, as Nate mentioned, once you kind of slice and dice based on your different criteria or different attributes, Facebook will actually tell you if you have friends in common. So that way you're not just having to reach out saying, hey, we both went to the University of Georgia. You're able to say, hey, I actually know that my cousin is actually friends with you on Facebook. So now instead of reaching out and sending that cold email, I may be able to call up my cousin and say, hey, how well do you actually know this person? I see your friends on Facebook, but do you know them well enough that you'd be able to introduce us? This way we're kind of taking that, remember, social media is about being social. We're taking the relationships that we already have and turning them into better relationships for our particular business goals. So definitely take a look at any time that you have shared connections with any of these marketing or promotional prospects, because that is going to be something where if you can have a personal introduction, there is almost nothing more valuable for an outreach campaign than having that personal introduction.
That's a great example. And actually that leads into, you have a great list of principles of social courtship that you talked about at State of Search.
I do. And this kind of is why when I really went into the idea of using social media to build relationships, because I got married earlier this year. I got married on March 1st. And so going through the whole wedding planning and getting ready to, to become a husband, I really started thinking about what makes a great marriage. And I came up with what I call the 5 C's. And that's communication, commitment, cooperation, creativity, and courtship. And the more I thought about that, I realized that those same 5 C's can be applied to great marketing. It requires strong communication. It requires a commitment to your brand. It requires cooperation from all of your different marketing disciplines. It requires creativity to be able to find a way to stand out from the rest of the competition. And it requires constant courtship. Your goal as a marketer is to make people fall in love with your brand over and over and over again. And I have what I call these principles of social courtship because I view social media, especially trying to reach new people. I view social media a lot like dating. So I haven't dated for almost 8 years. We just got married this year, but my wife and I met in college, in her freshman year, my sophomore year. But I still remember all the principles of dating, which we really kind of built our relationship. We had to start by finding common ground, things that we had in common with one another, interests that we shared. And once I learned what, her interests were, I had to take a real legitimate interest in those interests. It has to be something that you care about. You have to be invested in it. You have to be patient. You have to understand that it takes time to build a relationship, that it's more than, just like marketing. Marketing is more than sending an email and expecting to get a link, is more than just, asking for a phone number and expecting them to marry you. You have to be patient. You have to build it over time. And you want to pay it forward. And we're going to get to this a little bit later when we talk about the concept of preciprocation. But the idea is you have to be willing to put more of yourself into a relationship than you may get back. In a good relationship, you're going to get the same, if not more, back. But when you're talking about marketing, especially with social media, you need to pay it forward and make sure that you are investing and giving somebody a reason to pay attention to you before you ask for anything in return. And the last thing is to not be creepy. I gave an example at State of Search where you can, if you wanted to, you can find somebody's Twitter profile, look at the city that they have listed, search the public records and find out where that person lives, Google Earth their house, zoom in, realize that they like gardening, send them a pack of tomato seeds and say, hey, it looks like the garden is wilting a little bit. I hope these can help. By the way, I'd love to talk to you about this infographic I produced. You can do that. I would venture to guess you would get at most a 0% response rate on that particular strategy because it's creepy. People don't want to be, you don't want to be intrusive. You have to make sure that you are balancing the same way that you would want to be able to start a new relationship, as you're dating. Take a lot of those same principles into what you do from a marketing perspective and a social media perspective to be able to build the right kind of relationships.
Yeah, and I actually had a really good example from personal experience last month. So on my website, shiverweb.com, I write a lot about choosing the right tools, the right software to set up do-it-yourselfers and freelancers for success. Because of that, I get a lot of PR pitches and people who have researched found that I write about this stuff and they pitch me. And most of the pitches are awful. Actually, nearly all of them are awful. It's basically they find me through Twitter, through some kind of research, and they send me an email that's basically, hey, I found your blog. We have this software. It does this. Will you write about it? And that's literally it. And I always respond, but I always respond. I'm like, hey, no, I have a huge editorial calendar. I have a lot of work. I'm just not. But sales.com, apparently about a month ago, I noticed that they had started following me on Twitter. I had tweeted a few things and they favorited it. They retweeted it. And so I was like, okay, these guys are cool. Anyway, so I had seen their brand pop up in my Twitter feed, and about a couple weeks ago, a guy named Jeff Austin, who apparently runs marketing over at Sales.com, was doing it really right and sent me an email that said, "Hey, really liked your blog." He didn't just send over a random templated email. It was apparent that he had actually read several of my articles. He talked about common interest, common ground, about how there's a big need for do-it-yourselfers and people trying to run their own websites working in that space. He was very complimentary, and he didn't pitch me. He mentioned that, he's from sales.com. They're in V1. They're trying to get feedback. And that, he'd give me a free trial if I ever want to just try it out. And I followed up. We had a good back and forth. He never pitched me once, but it was a really, really good conversation. And it's definitely something that in hindsight, I realized, that this guy really, obviously, he's wanting me to write about him, and I will. Might take me a few months, but just the process of He really did a lot to help me out by tweeting out my articles, sharing it, being very complimentary. And it was a really good process. And I think a really good example of exactly what Brett was talking about.
And this goes back to that idea, and I kind of alluded to this, but it's a concept called preciprocation. And it's an integral part of relationship building and good quality promotional outreach. And you want to do something for someone else before you ask for anything in return. And don't expect anything in return. You don't go out on the first date and ask for sex before you've opened the door to the car, and that's it's a pretty crude analogy here, but the same concept applies to the people who Nate just talked about. Said, you have a blog. We write about my software. There's no reason for that. We don't, when you have a blog, you don't necessarily care about the individual person who wants to pitch you unless they show an interest and they can say, is your software going to meet my users' needs? Are you going to respect the fact that I write about a very particular type of, subject? I have a personal blog where I really just write things just for fun. I call it my sandbox, just things to play around with. And I get pitches to write about enterprise level software for, big data. It's very clear that you have done nothing to understand who I am or who my audience is. And just like Nate talked about, we want to honor this code of social courtship with relationship building and social media, because ultimately that is what is going to be valuable for you. That is what's going to allow you to reach the right influencers, the people who not only have the authority and are able to expand the scope of what you're trying to do, but there are also people that you can connect with, that you can engage with, that you are going to be able to provide a value add for them. To go back to Nate's greatest example, you want to find something where the moderators win, the audience wins, and you win. Find that wow content that Brian Dean talked about. You really want to be able to find the stuff and use social media to do it, to be able to go out there and say, I am going to create content that is going to matter. I am going to promote it to people that matter. And I'm going to be able to communicate to those people why it matters. And all of this it's hard. It takes time. It's not your templated email that can be sent out to 500 people a day. But I would rather have a 10% response rate on 50 emails a day than a 1% response rate on 10,000 emails a day. I'm not sure if those numbers work, but I think you understand what I'm going for here. And really the relationship side of social media and the relationship side of SEO really allows you to connect and engage with your audience and honor that social construct that was created based on these search engines that really just want to model relationships on the web to be able to define authority and relevance, which by extension they use to determine your organic rankings.
All right. So next week, we're going to talk about how social media can amplify your content, amplify your SEO. But for now, you can find part 1 on Bamboo Chalupa, where you can also find show notes and links to things that we mentioned, screenshots that Brett was describing, and our contact information. Again, bamboochalupa.com. You can subscribe to the podcast in iTunes, and we'd love to have you leave a comment and rating while you're there. It gives us great feedback, and it helps others discover the show. So for Brett Snyder, I'm Nate Shiver, and thank you for listening.